Well, hola, buenos dias todos. I think that we should probably start. Nearly everyone appears to be here, and so we'll make a start. I want to say good morning to everyone and welcome back. Buenos dias. Okay. Okay. So this morning I just want to think back to yesterday. And we went through communications, and some of the questions that people were asking, I think, were actually answered by Professor Zunt in his session. But there were a couple of slides that I didn't use yesterday, just that I wanted to go back, because I think I just wanted to finish off yesterday as we were running out of time. So there's just a couple of slides from yesterday just to carry on. A little bit about effective feedback, and Professor Zunt touched on this, so I just wanted to expand a little more. So there are some factors for feedback that I think we need to say in terms of mentoring. You need to be honest and open, otherwise too much time is wasted. And that feedback needs to come quite quickly. So if there's an incident has happened or there's something that you need to pick up on, then it should be timely, it should be at the right time. Feedback needs to be focused, so on specific aspects, and it could be specific behaviors, and also with the emphasis of picking up those potential difficulties but providing some ideas for solutions. And I think in any situation, and again, Professor Zunt mentioned this yesterday, we always have to acknowledge that there are external factors, particularly at the moment, but there's always some external factors that we can't control that lead to changes and things that we need to take account of. So there are two types of feedback. One from the mentor, so feedback from the mentor. So you would focus on strengths and assets. You're trying to nurture, you're trying to develop your mentee. So focus on their strengths and their assets, and highlight some areas for growth and for development, and maybe how you would do that. Then there will potentially be areas of poor behavior or attitude. And some of these are to do with perhaps the perceptions of others. So if you're managing, if there's a team, if you think back to the Johari window that we looked at yesterday, there are some of those attributes that others see about us, but we don't see about ourselves. What we would call it our blind spot. And those are some of the things that perhaps you would need to discuss with your mentee. But always in any of these things, ending on positive actions, things that you can ask the mentee to implement and things that they can do to change that. So whether that's to do with their growth and development, they may need a particular form of training, whether that's in a particular lab skill or in scientific writing perhaps, but try and always end in that positive action. And then there's also the feedback from the mentee, and again, Professor Zunt mentioned that. So you may, I suppose I should have started at the end really. It's possible that as a mentor, you would have to encourage them to do this. They may not be used to questioning someone who's their senior in this way, or giving their feedback to a senior member of the team or member of staff. So you may need to encourage them, at least to start with, to feedback about how helpful your advice was. And also the things that work and the things that don't work. And that way it becomes a discussion and people take on that role, and the mentee will take on the role and the responsibility of following up. But certainly at the beginning, that can often be very difficult. So it's something that needs to be encouraged. Before I just go on to today's subject proper, the skills, there were some questions. The one that stands out right at the top of my list that was sent to me is, where does mentoring begin and where does it end? I can't answer that. It's a huge area, and as the mentoring relationship develops, then that will change. And I think we got a flavour of that when we were talking yesterday, and I think that will also be the case when we have a speaker again today, that the mentoring on the ground, the real for real, you will start to get a feel for that. There's also a couple of questions that I just wanted to go over about how is it possible if we're only having 1 or 2 mentees, maybe, how can we provide that for the whole faculty? And I think that wasn't if we go back to the overarching goal or aim of this course, it's specifically to encourage early career women researchers. So I imagine that there aren't that many. Someone has asked the question to say we've got 3,000 students in the institution, but we're not really at this point, although you could roll out mentoring across the whole of the education system. But we're not really talking about that at this point. The overall goal for this type of mentoring was for the early career women researchers who are underrepresented within the system and perhaps face particular problems and difficulties that mentoring will help overcome. So I hope that clarifies that. There were 2 or 3 questions around numbers, and then there were several other questions around personal problems and how you would deal with that. And again, that will depend very much on how far we are in a relationship of mentoring. And it may be that you don't have the expertise to assist with particular problems, but there will be people within your institution or perhaps colleagues that you can draw on their experience. And that came back to a question yesterday where someone asked, are there mentors for mentors? And I think that's developing a network. If you are going to become a mentor and you are new to it, then it's good to have a network around you that you can also rely on and pass some ideas and talk confidentially. You don't need to reveal who you're talking about, but just to get some extra ideas. So that there's quite a lot of questions around those kind of themes. Okay, so we're going to pass on to today. And so we're looking at mentoring in the realms of developing specific skills. And that might be you looking at the skills that you have and reassessing those as well. There may be some benefits for you as well in this. So the learning objectives that I want to try and cover today was to gain some insights on how to mentor for skills within a science and research background within that context. So that might be working in teams and how you can use mentoring to improve working in teams. Time management, which I think we can all always think about. Negotiation, and also the uses of different tools and resources for mentoring. And some of those tools and resources will come when we issue a handbook after this course of various bits and pieces that have been touched on within this course. And then we'll also have our invited speaker later on, who comes from University of California, San Francisco, who have an excellent departmental or faculty mentoring scheme. And that's very much part of their whole department. And it's slightly different, I think, than some of the ideas that the schemes in Peru are going to be using, but it nonetheless are really useful to see how the different approaches might be. So today's session, as I say, we're going to look at some of these things of working in teams and time management. We'll get a short break, and then we'll do some more of the group work, because I think those discussions are really useful There's a mix of people who've got a mix of experience, and it's great to pick up on some of those, but particularly around negotiations. We'll come back and do some feedback and then have another break before our speaker, and then look at some of the tools and resources at the end. So, research teams. There is obviously a huge variation in the setup of teams. Within institutions, within universities, different teams may be set up in different ways. They may be across institutions, they may be across countries and international research teams. They may be quite flat, so there may be a lot of researchers who are roughly at the same stage of their career, or they may be quite hierarchical. And we all know, and we've probably all worked in different teams that are run in very different ways. So there may be different leadership styles. People who are very clear and strict on how they run their team, and there's others who are much more open and relaxed. You know that you will have worked in and can recognize some of these different types of teams. So it's quite difficult to give general rules, but I want to try and think about how we can use mentoring to improve our teams on a practical level. There may be multiple investigators, principal investigators, and there may be, and I think this has come up in the questions as well, there may be competition and friction, some of which is healthy and is good, and some of which can be difficult, as I'm sure you would agree. And one of the questions that I know that people were concerned about, that you're mentoring someone to take your job. But I think we need to think about mentoring for the next generation and bringing people through, and not just to protect our own position against all costs. Because eventually, if we protect everything as we get older and we don't share our knowledge and we don't bring people through, that research team will collapse. So we need to think about that succession and planning and be a little more open and generous. I know we all tend to sometimes want to have our own area, but we need within mentoring, it's done with a spirit of generosity. And I can see some people are nodding and laughing at that. But I think it's something we need to acknowledge within a mentoring context. So I'm looking at what's probably the classic team development. So as we pass along time and we're focused on a task on our y-axis and moving along time, we have teams, a team formation where we start, we're forming, we're excited, and then sometimes that drops off, and we then often end up disagreeing and arguing, and it can be quite a difficult period of time. And then hopefully we reach the bottom and start then moving up the curve to normalize, to work in a good way and get to know each other's roles. And hopefully at the end of that, we are then performing. So in English, we use forming, storming, norming, and performing. And this is a classical team development from the 60s with Bruce Tuckman. I think that's great for a team who have been brought together for one very specific task, but often within research teams and departments, we're looking at longer timescales. And so there are some limitations about thinking about how we get from the start of a team and encourage people to work well together. And so there are these limits. And often we have a hierarchical team, so there are new staff members coming in, new people coming into different positions, people leaving. So often that changes the dynamics and changes that team all the time. So it isn't, we don't just set up a team perhaps and we have that nice curve where we all get to know each other, we fall out, we make friends, we work well together, because people are coming and going. And if you can bring mentoring into that team situation, then hopefully those changing dynamics as we cycle through the phases can be, we can incorporate someone into our team through mentoring to make the whole team work well. Effective teams who have members who find new ways of working. And in mentoring, I think we need to encourage these things, to initiate changes. So one of the things for mentoring within a team will be to leave enough space for people to be creative and to make change and to encourage people to spread best practice. And it may be that your new person coming into a team actually has some real key expertise that they can share with the rest of the team as well in terms of peer mentoring and group mentoring. So the mentee may also become that mentor, or in that case maybe a trainer, to spread their expertise. But then your team hopefully will encourage and support each other. People will take the lead in their area of expertise and make connections across an organisation and perhaps beyond. And if we have an effective team in that way, and we want our teams to work really well, we can do this by a series of steps. And I think it does all, I'm sure we're all aware of this, great recruitment. Not spending that time to recruit well and to find out about that person. I mean, a great team starts at that point. But even at recruitment, I've always in the past when I've been recruiting key members in my team, have talked to them about mentoring right from the start, whether they've had experience of it in other roles that they've been in or in other organisations, if they would be open to that mentoring, and to see their opinion as well, because I think it's quite an interesting way to start bringing mentoring through a whole organisation, right from recruitment. And then the induction. And I've been inducted in many ways in different jobs. I've had a lot of different jobs in my life and different careers paths even. And I have nightmares and where people have just put me in a desk and said, get on with it, with no support. So in terms of induction and thinking about that, if it's done well, your team, although it seems like you're spending a lot of time and your team is spending a lot of time, if it's done well, obviously it will be to the benefit of everyone as you go forward. You need to be developing individuals and developing the group. And one of the ways to do that is with effective mentoring. And that will help incorporate new members into a team. And it may be that you mentor a number, and there are a number of different ways of mentoring, a number of different models. So when we're talking about women and in this context, which was the setup for this whole course about mentoring early career women researchers, we have to think about mentoring a new person coming into a team if they are the only woman in that team, which I know can be the case, and how that may change the dynamics and how we can help mentor through that process. It may be that the team that you have, who are all male, are not used to working with women. And they may have certain preconceptions about that. And that's something that we will also come on to when looking at diversity and difference in tomorrow's session. So there, I think there's a particular importance to think about that when you're recruiting and inducting and working with women that you're bringing into your teams. I've just sort of made some notes. I was trying to think of some of the main types of mentoring that I've been involved in. And the sort of one-to-one dyads of a senior and a junior. But it may be that a senior person will mentor up to maybe 2 or 3 junior members of staff. Or it could be that you mentor within a team because there are very specific skills and people will spend different times with different people. Many mentoring schemes are set up in different ways, and I think, again, we got the sense of that from Professor Zunt yesterday, where he was also talking about peer mentoring, compañeros, where peers or near peers will also mentor each other, because that peer learning and peer mentoring, if it's encouraged, can also strengthen your team. And maybe that very specific mentoring and learning that you need for a particular type of skill, which might not exist within your knowledge or the knowledge of people very close in your team. And again, we talked about that yesterday as well. And then independent mentoring. Sometimes it's useful for someone to have someone that they identify with outside of the organisation as well, which will help them bring in different knowledge and understand how different teams and different departments, different universities work. So you might want, if you are a leader and you have changing dynamics, and you decide you're going to mentor a new member of your team, and if this is new for your team, for your university, for your institution, these are some of the things that you may like to think about. There may be accusations that you're favouring this person over your existing older team members. So I think if you're bringing mentoring into a team and you're starting perhaps with some new team members, you need to be very clear to the existing team about why you're doing that, because of that element of friction that can occur. It may be that there's clashing of personalities. There may be tension between being a senior person mentoring a junior person and how they deal with that. And again, you need to think about that when you're developing your mentoring skills. There is that tension. And then there's that very hands-on, that takes us back to the support model, the graph of the support and challenge, where we are balancing. If you have too much support and stifling people's creativity, then you're going to perhaps limit people's breakthroughs and development. So if you're too hands-on, or you start to take too much credit for your mentees' work, which does happen, this is going to stifle creativity and it will cause more tensions within your team. So team mentoring, in that way, there are lots of these different models. But if you're thinking within a team as a mentor and you want to embed that, to really make it strong within your institution, then you need to think about every aspect of your work and how you can incorporate those learning opportunities. So you can involve everyone, and that will again improve the team dynamic. So in grant writing, which is a huge skill, which if you're a successful researcher, you will definitely have that skill. And you may want to allocate parts of that if it's a group project. Or in publication writing, where you're working on a new publication and perhaps the more junior members of the team are given the responsibility to write a first draft and use that as a teaching, as a mentoring process. If you're going to conferences, presentations, if you have specific skills or succession planning and networking, all of these things that happen within our daily lives can be used as learning opportunities, as ways to mentor. It initially feels like we're doing a lot of work, and thinking about all these different opportunities where we can encourage people to take part. But at the end of that, you will end up with a team or a group, or your mentee is nurtured and grows, which should bring benefits back to you as well. So it feels like that once you get into the habit of doing it, it becomes easy, when it becomes instinctive in the way that you work as a mentor. Okay, so in terms of mentoring within a team, there are lots of different ways that we can do that. But it just takes a mind shift to think differently about opportunities that you can be using. So I think we just talk a little bit about time management. Certainly it's something that I look at back for myself quite regularly, because things pile up. I've got a big pile of letters to answer, emails to answer, reports to write, new funding opportunities, new projects coming in, all this all the time, and prioritizing. And although I've been, I'm relatively old and I've been doing it a long time, I think it sometimes is valuable to go back and look at a system. And mentoring was when I was mentoring another person who had this problem, was the time that I realized the value of rethinking my own strategies. You may have a really good time management strategy or plan or system, and there are lots of them out there. But I'm going to use an example of the California one because it really works for me. But to revisit it from time to time for ourselves, whilst we're mentoring other people to be able to do that, is a really useful skill, I believe. So I'll talk a little bit about time management. So reviewing our own methods, choose your own tool, or maybe try a new one if yours isn't working. But when mentoring, I think if you can stick to a system, it's useful, because if you're confident in a system, you can pass on that skill to someone else. And there are benefits, there are definite benefits to both the mentor and the mentee. It gives more focus. And when you're trying, particularly if you have a mentee within your team, it will help you to focus them. It will inevitably free up some time, so you'll have more time. You'll be able to take advantage of more opportunities. Hopefully there will be less stress, and hopefully realize goals for yourself, for your mentee, and for your team. There are lots of parts of this. I've thought about many of the different bits of time management, but there are two things I think that I rely on more and more. One is to set time limits. I think that's absolutely key. I am going to write part of this paper, but I'm only going to do this much. I'm going to set a time, and then I know I have to go and do X, Y, and Z, and be really conscious of doing that. And then the other one, I think that is the one that is my favorite one, is to eliminate the things that you don't need to do, and be quite ruthless about that. And I think we all have to be. And I'm going to use, as I say, the University of California, San Francisco structure to do this, and I think it's a really interesting and easy way to classify, particularly when you're mentoring, what are the things that you can get rid of. I'm not sure, I don't know how this works in Spanish, but this, obviously we have SMART targets, translated here, inteligentes, and those that I have this in a great big poster just above on my wall here all the time, so that I'm continuously thinking about this, to make the things that I'm doing very specific, to make sure that what I'm doing, I can measure success, that I can attain that I've got all the tools, all the information that I need, and that it's relevant to the project that I'm working on. and that it's timely, that I'm doing things in the right order, and that if I have to think about something that's coming down the ahead, one of the people who mentored me used to talk about throwing balls, and in my past life, I don't know whether I should say this. In my past life, I used to be a juggler. I've worked as a performer many years ago in a circus. So the ideas of being able to throw balls. So you're throwing short balls that you're doing, but you're throwing some really long balls that when you get there in a month's time, you can catch that and carry on. And that's what I mean by being timely. And some of these skills for new members of staff that you can mentor are really, really key. That not just to think about the day-to-day and how to impart that, how to teach them that. So this is the quadrant that University of California, San Francisco use. So we have urgent things and not urgent things, important and not important. And they divide this into 4 quadrants. And I really like this system. And sometimes when I feel overwhelmed, I look at all my tasks and think about them and decide which quadrant they go into. So there's the necessary, and there's the deception and the waste, and then the leadership and the quality of the work that you do. And if we just look at those quadrants one by one and think of those examples, this can be a really useful way of teaching your staff or mentoring people. So if things are important and urgent, they obviously need to be done, and they need to be prioritized. So it's the quadrant of necessity, and you need to take that on. And those are some examples. There are some examples of those things that are both urgent and important. And those are the things that you need to manage daily, probably, or even by the hour. So I think that those are sort of, I think that it's always useful to have a little bit of space to see those last minute opportunities that come past your desk that will be really useful later on, and to have a little bit of flexibility to be able to do that. The next quadrant, I think, is the focused quadrant, where things are important, but not necessarily life and death or urgent. And this is probably where most of our work is, the planning and preparation, the project work, the research, and for ourselves as well. And you can see that there are also aspects of this for our life. We need to have genuine recreation and relaxation. We need to exercise. We need to find time to eat well. All of these things these are the things that are really important that we need to probably fill. This is the part where we focus on our normal lives, working lives, and our home lives. Then looking perhaps at the quadrant of deception. So here things urgent or appear urgent, or people are telling you they're urgent, but they're not actually totally important to what you're trying to achieve. And so here you might want to try and avoid altogether, maybe, or at least delay them until they really do become important. And that will be some of our emails, we don't have to respond to everything. Our social media, interruptions that come that you're not expecting. There are many things that appear to be urgent, which aren't really urgent, and trying to stand back and decide that actually the world is not going to end and my job is not going to become much better, and there's very little value in this particular thing. So I'm going to put that on one side because it just doesn't need it. So there are these things that you can avoid, hopefully, or delay. And then there's the last quadrant, which is just a waste of time. And I would say avoid these at all costs. So all your junk email, all those mailing lists that you're on that fill up your inbox, that perhaps that were useful 4 or 5 years ago, but now are not useful. Some of your mail that comes through your normal post, the busy work, the things that can take an awful lot of time but actually don't achieve very much. And escape activities, the things that we do when we've got a job that needs doing, the tidying of the room, the tidying of our desk. Oh, I'll just go and do the washing up because I don't really want to respond to this. All those activities that we take on sometimes to try and avoid doing the really difficult job that we know we really should be doing. And those people that come to your office door that you know have a very, very short question that you could answer very quickly, but they're probably going to take an hour of your time. I don't know if Penny does the tiempo. In English, we use time wasters. So those people that are good people, and they perhaps do need that answer, but sometimes you know that it's not just going to be that. There's going to be a long, drawn-out conversation. So you need to work out how to handle those people. And I'm sure we all have them in our work life. And the consequences of those aspects of not being able to manage your time. You may all have a lot of different ways to do this, but it's sometimes useful to look at a different system or to revisit your system and reprioritize. And when you're using something like that to teach, to mentor someone else, having this what I think is a really good structure to do that can clarify for some people how to approach all the various demands that are coming at them when they're new and new to that job. And there are so many consequences of poor time management, the wasted time, things that are really good opportunities that you might miss because you're preoccupied with something else. Workflow, if you're behind on your workflow, then it's going to have knock-on effects to other people down the line maybe. So it's going to affect other people's workflow. You might be missing deadlines. Your work tends to become poorer quality. And the worst thing of all, probably for an academic, is a loss of reputation and people no longer want to work with you. So I think it's a really important part of what we do, and to be able to, and to have got to be successful senior academics or researchers, you will probably be doing this, but maybe not as consciously, and to be able to pass that skill on. So thinking about a system of how that works and how to prioritize is a really valuable skill in mentoring. Apologies for that. So I'm looking at the time, and I think I'm just about okay. Since we've been talking about time management, that's probably a very good thing. In terms of developing your mentees, all the things that we've already talked about, really sharing your systems of time management. If you're having meetings, putting in particular time slots to do that within your mentoring meeting as well. To walk the floor, again, a mentor would always appear very suddenly just to check that you were actually particularly if I had complained that I was too busy. They sometimes would walk around and just not spying on me, but just saying, how are you doing? Are you really that busy? Are you prioritizing the right things? So walking the floor to check on that process if it's someone you're mentoring who's within your team and department. How to recognize crises and how to prioritize. And also over time, that very important pushing towards independence, trying not to take over too much. But that will take time. That self-management and being able to function well takes time. And that's part of the mentoring process, that you're bringing someone to that independence. And that question that I started with, that someone raised about where does mentoring begin and where does it end? When we're passing all these skills and way to work and how to improve our efficiency and our enjoyment and gain our work-life balance, the mentoring then will pass over, and you get to that point where the mentee can become a mentor themselves. But it is all about passing on the skills that you will all have developed over some of your working life. So the next part today are back into groups. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the group work today. We're going to have and then we'll have a 10-minute break, and then come back into your rooms, the breakout rooms, at about 5 minutes to 10, thereabouts, and we have about 40 minutes. And so we're going to be looking at negotiations. So within the team, or however you work, try and think about the different types of negotiations that are involved. Being able to negotiate well, whether that's for time or resources or all sorts of aspects, is really important. And being able to pass on that skill in mentoring is key. So what makes a good negotiation? Does the most senior or the leader always have to win? So those are the kind of things that I want to discuss. The facilitators will be recording and using chat notes as we have in other days. And then after about 40 minutes, I'd like everyone to come back into the main room, and either the facilitator or maybe a brave volunteer from the group to do just maybe a minute or two of feedback from each group about some of the key points that have come up in the discussions. So we're going to have a 10-minute break now. You'll then go back and come back into the smaller groups, back into the main group for feedback, followed by a break. And then after that break, we will also have our guest speaker. So I hope that's all okay. And thinking about negotiations as part of the group work and how and when they occur, and sharing your best practice that we can capture as well. Thank you for your time. Stretch your legs, have another coffee, hope for me, and I will see you all in a while. Okay, it looks like we have the full number back.
Should we give them 5 minutes, Deborah, or you are?
Can we do the 1 minute feedback from each group now, and then have a break?
Oh.
So is that possible?
Yeah, I guess you want the facilitators to do that, or somebody from the group?
Either the facilitators, or if they have a willing volunteer from the group, but I don't mind either way. So who was in group 1?
¿Alguna de las facilitadoras? ¿Qué facilitador era grupo 1? Yo sé que yo soy grupo 2.
Yo no recuerdo qué grupo era.
¿Quieres ser voluntaria?
Sí, en nuestro grupo, Marcos Antonio es voluntario para presentar nuestros resumen de comentarios. Marcos Antonio.
Okay, so we are unmuted. Great. Gracias.
Ok, buenos días para todos. Un placer Y bueno, por parte de nuestro grupo, creo que si vamos a ser mentores de un grupo de personas, tenemos que saber reconocer nuestros errores si se produce una negociación. Y de las ideas que nosotros hemos tenido acá, la negociación puede ser lugar en cualquier parte, como he visto ya sea una investigación, algún equipo o alguna cosa que realmente necesite. Hemos visto que hay un plan de trabajo que necesitamos cumplir, pero que muchas veces, si no se pueden cumplir los objetivos, debemos estar dispuestos a escuchar. Creo que lo importante es tomar una decisión y también llegar a un acuerdo al final. Lo importante, creo que de una negociación es justamente llegar a ese acuerdo donde se satisfagan las partes y que podamos al final no solamente llegar al acuerdo, sino que aplicar ese acuerdo para que luego podamos ver si realmente es importante los puntos de vista de cada quien que debemos tomar en cuenta, porque a veces se cambia algo, pero no se lleva a ejecútese. Entonces es importante no solamente hacer los cambios, sino que realmente se vea el fruto al final. Creo que es importante eso. Bueno, gracias de esa seriedad. Otra cosa importante es que llevar los puntos bien claros y clarificar las metas para que no haya malentendido. Sí, creo que es importante. Gracias.
Ok, gracias. Patricia, are you?
Sí, sí.
Fiorella,
Yo tengo que hacer un mea culpa
one.
porque como ya llegamos al final, no llegamos a definir quién iba a ser el voluntario en el grupo. Entonces, no sé si alguno de los que han participado, Mario, José Francisco, no sé si alguien quiere levantar, alguien de mi grupo y quisiera, José Francisco, adelante.
Gracias.
Oh.
Sí, el grupo muy interesante. En general, todos hemos estado de acuerdo en que el verdadero liderazgo busca que él gane el equipo y no siempre su posición. Hemos estado de acuerdo que tenemos varios contextos de negociación.
Discuss these issues as they come up, either with our mentees who come from diverse backgrounds or ourselves if we come from those diverse backgrounds. And what that means, and we need to be able to convey and again communicate and be open to listening to perspectives which may be very different than our own, and to recognize our own biases as a mentor so that we can improve our communication again with our mentees. So I hope that you have an opportunity during this course around mentoring to discuss in greater depth, maybe in small groups, the issues of diversity in your country. One of our goals as a mentor, especially in academia, but also outside of academia, is really to foster independence. And I really found this photo on Google Images. It's not hard anymore, around the independence. I guess this is when independence was declared in Peru. And we're really helping our mentees to become independent, and something that I explain oftentimes is, it's many times for some of my trainees, it's easier to be dependent. People call me by my first name. So Craig, what do you think I should do? What do you think my next study should be? What do you think the aim should be? And in my general way of thinking is, it's not, if I want to really foster their independence, I may have ideas, and it may be brilliant ideas, but they also have ideas, and they definitely have ideas. I want them to develop the ideas. I'm willing to reflect on their ideas, but I want them to come up. So there are different ways of conveying this independence and supporting independence in our mentees. Even some are going to be extremely willing and eager to move into independence, maybe too quickly, and need that support. And while others are going to need to be supported at a greater level. So you'll need to figure that out in your relationships. The noise for a moment as I turn the page. Professional development is really critical. I think we don't oftentimes as mentor focus enough on this and what this means. Oftentimes now science, for the most part, is really a team effort. You may serve as the principal investigator or the leader of a team, or you may be a part of the team. All are essential elements for successful science nowadays. This is the period of an independent scientist, completely independent and not surrounded by other people, is really not working, whether it's in clinical research or laboratory research or social behavioral research. Perhaps the anthropologist who does ethnographic work might be the sole exception. Something I spend time on as well with my mentees is, how do you manage a team? I think this is something, as you become independent, or some of you are, many of you might be independent as well, you already recognize that the administrative aspects of your job, or what will become the administrative aspects, is really critical. How do you hire a team, a supportive team that are working well together? How do you deal with the financial aspects? How do you deal with the regulatory responsibilities? We don't have enough time to go into this, but certainly as you serve as a mentor, you need to develop these skills. You may be looking to other people to support you. Administration might be working with your unit's administrator to learn those skills, and maybe not with the professor in your department or in your public health department. But these are essential for the success of research. There is the business side of doing these sorts of studies. Of course, science works because of a level of inherent trust. And we know what happens when that trust breaks down, as we've seen, unfortunately, in my own country. People may not trust science to the same degree as they once did, and hopefully we'll regain that trust. But professional integrity is at the center of that we know that, and the peer review process for manuscripts and for many of our grants is also essential as well. We need to demonstrate to the highest capacity our honesty and openness with our mentees. We make mistakes. We need to be honest about when we make mistakes. How do we overcome those mistakes? And to support our mentees when they make mistakes as well. We need to figure out a balance of authorship. Oftentimes this is a contentious issue, and hopefully you've had opportunities to talk about some of this already, or will in the rest of your mentoring course. But it's very important to be upfront with your mentors and with the other team of scientists you're working with about your expectations about being first author, last author, and the middle author, these sorts of roles, and also roles on grants and projects. People's feathers can get ruffled very easily. I've had to step in quite often, more often than I would like, to support mentees of mine to negotiate with oftentimes senior scientists. And it's very important to have these discussions early on, and to find you want to work with people that obviously understand you and are going to support you and your development. Time is limited, money is limited as well. And we need, again, as we work as mentors, we need to help them and help ourselves as well, to be honest, to overcome the challenges of resource limitations. And this can come about through, again, learning various administrative duties, building a team approach, delegation of certain tasks to, might be trainees of yours, or to administrative staff or research coordinator staff, depending on your teams, or laboratory staff, public health staff, in order to work collectively. And this is even more important right now during the COVID pandemic, when most of us are working remotely, unless we're physically in a health center or hospital. We need to figure out improved ways of communication virtually, as well as continuing to work as a team. And we'll need to continue these skills, obviously, after the pandemic wanes. Nothing is static, change is constant, and our institutions are changing all the time. And we need to be, as both trainees and as faculty or public health officials, I think you come from a variety of backgrounds, if I remember correctly, we need to be agents for positive change and understand the various factors that are influencing the change, both external changes in government, which both of our countries are going through right now, changes within administration within our own institutions, as well as internal issues that may be around various people taking breaks from their careers, and or other sorts of changes that are, in this case, another external, obviously, is the pandemic and how that's affecting us as well. And I think this pandemic in particular is really pushing our institutions to radically change. And I don't expect my institution, UCSF, to go back to what was normal pre-pandemic. And there will be many benefits, I think, from what we're learning and how to work successfully virtually in order to move us once we move into the post-pandemic. So we need to be agents for those change. There's also social change in my own country going on as well. And we need to be able to incorporate that, and this is around diversity and Black Lives Matter, incorporate that into our concepts of mentoring so we can become better mentors as well for our increasingly diverse trainees. So I'm now going to transition to the second part of my talk, which is something that is a very important topic to me personally. This is called, so what we're going to talk about now is transitioning the mentoring relationship. And I specifically put here a photo. Some of you might know who this is. It's Professor King Holmes from the University of Washington, who has been my primary mentor for 27 years. Also Patty Garcia's mentor. He's been a mentor for many, many people. And I want to talk about this topic. It's personal, but also I think will be useful for you as you move ahead in your careers. So there's many phases to mentoring, and in regards to if you think about in your own life, your own mentoring relationships, there's different phases from the introduction to the cultivation of the relationship. Again, I believe, I don't know what you've been taught or you discussed, that mentoring is ideally a mentee-driven process, meaning you select your mentors. Of course, they need to be willing as well. And then there's a long period where we continue our ongoing relationship. We have to make decisions because there's transitions as people advance from maybe completing their PhD or their MD and move on to residency or fellowship, postdoc, and eventually faculty. There's an opportunity to redefine that relationship. So who does this relate to? This can relate to graduate students. The advantages are graduate students are obviously have many advantages because they have many choices. They're very idealistic, and they usually aren't so set in exactly what it is they want to do. So they're malleable. Challenges, of course, is that they're not as well differentiated. They have diverse and wide range of intellectual potential, and they also have other responsibilities. Oftentimes they're taking courses, they're teaching, they have time for research, so they have to divide their time appropriately. Professional students, like medical students, could be nursing students, veterinary students, pharmacy students. Advantages are they're better differentiated. I want to become a doctor. Of course, there are many different kinds of doctors, as we all know. They're relatively uniform in their training and set. And they have a lot of intellectual potential, similar to the graduate students. Disadvantages, of course, is that there can be a lot of competition amongst I know medical students the best because that's the path that I chose. There's somewhat limited choices, and there's also, again, shared responsibilities for courses and in the clinic and so forth. I think increasingly, at least in the US, I don't know about in Peru, the medical schools now are set up to have differentiated time now for doing deep dive or what we call, or research, or what we call deep dive at UCSF, where the students are given clear periods of time, 4 months, 5 months, where they can just focus on research. So it doesn't conflict with their other responsibilities of learning as a medical student. So junior faculty, the advantages for these individuals, and this is a really critical period of time for development if one is moving towards independence. It may not just be for junior faculty, this would be also junior, similar in public health organizations, perhaps in Peru. These could also be, so think analogously to those sorts of positions. The advantages are there's now shared decision-making, right? Because these individuals have increased their capacity, their learning, and now they have the responsibility. They have the potential for collaboration, both with you potentially as a mentor, but also with other individuals within their institution and with outside of their institution. Disadvantages, of course, is that now there's this potential for conflict of interest between the mentor and mentee. Intellectual competition and resource allocation and transfer. So as I mentioned earlier, there's only so many resources available for doing this research. And if your mentee is continuing work which you had initiated and now is advancing it, and you're both applying for grants, if you're dependent upon grant funding for your work, which most of us are, then now is your mentee becoming your competitor. And I think there's ways to getting around this to where you can create this collaborative relationship. And again, it's going to require opportunity for you to be open and honest and communicate with your mentee about their expectations, your expectations, and how those will change over time. These relationships definitely change. Sorry. Okay. This is just an example of the time frame when I'm talking about transition. How many years are we talking about? And we can just focus on the, these were kind of the time frame of how long our training is. And I think all of you are aware, for those of you who've completed your training, congratulations. For those of you who are in the middle of it, you can see how long it can take. And I put in just a US yardstick for you, or meter stick for you to be able to look at just for comparisons. There's some differences in our higher education system, but for the most part, we're looking at 20 to 30 years for a physician researcher, and anywhere from 13 to 22 years for a PhD researcher. That is a very, very long time. And it's a long time, meaning that we change through all these transitions from student to postdoc, to resident, to junior professor, junior faculty member, and then finally to a mid-career faculty member, which oftentimes mentoring is not something that ends even there. It can continue on into the professor years as well. I can count King Holmes as continues to serve as a mentor. I might meet with him only twice a year, but those meetings are really essential. I feel essential for me. I don't know if they're essential for him. So as we think about this more, when is the right time to transition? Oftentimes it naturally occurs when someone completes a certain phase of their training and moves into the next phase. And that gives us an opportunity to have that conversation with the mentee, the mentor-mentee, and to talk about, wow, you've done great. You look what you've accomplished. Now you're moving into this. You're moving to a new institution. I'd like to be able to continue to support you. What do you think about that idea? Or the mentee might say, I'm moving to a new institution, or maybe they're at the same institution, moving on. I've really valued this relationship, and I want to be able to continue to collaborate. So now they're using the word collaborate, but you still have this mentor-mentee relationship, but it ends up being more at a parallel level. Oftentimes, friendship may have developed as well. And I think friendship can be very appropriate within a mentee-mentor relationship. I'm not friends with all of my mentees, but I feel like I am and have been friends with many of my mentees as well. So there's also the opportunity to end or transition the relationship if one feels that is the best case. Maybe now the person's moved to a new institution again, or new program, and you're really busy, you have new students, and you want to transition that relationship to its conclusion. It's not that you and communication with the individual, but you stop serving in that role. But some things that can continue to happen during the more, as people advance into their postdocs and to junior faculty is, in fact, yesterday I met with somebody who's mid-career at UCSF, and she was very interested in how to get, she focuses on non-communicable diseases and global health. And we have a lot of strength at UCSF in non-communicable diseases, and we have a lot of focus on global health, but not the two combined. She wanted to have a conversation about how can I get more integrated into the global health world at UCSF. So we had an hour conversation about that. It's a newer relationship, mentor-mentee relationship that I've had over just this past year. So that was, and she's the one who sought me out to have that conversation. So there may be job search advice, which happens, and that usually is episodically as people move or thinking about transitioning. Oftentimes a very central role, and something that King Holmes has done so well over many, many years for so many people, is making that referral. So referral maybe to present at a conference, referral maybe because of that new job that you want, referral for grant funding that you're seeking. There are lots of sorts of referrals where people who are well-connected and senior members and mentors of ours can provide support to people who are more junior. Of course, grant writing advice and feedback, and then interviewing. People who've moved from UCSF, most of my mentees have wanted to go over and wanted help in applying for jobs as well as interviewing for those jobs. So whatever I can do as a mentor to help my mentees to continue to be successful, and many of my mentees, which is fantastic, from a position perspective, some are vice deans now. Some are chairs of departments and have headed institutes, all in really their own volition on being able to do that, and to know that I've played a small part in helping them to become successful brings me lots of joy as well. So as I mentioned briefly earlier, conflicts may happen during this period of transitioning. Again, there may be competition. Authorship on papers may become an issue, or questions around applying for various grants. And this is where the communication that hopefully you've been able to establish over years of time will help you to navigate that. And remember essentially what is important in regards to your relationship. And really, as a mentor, your goal is to help this individual become independent, and to fulfill their to use their full abilities to advance their careers as far as they can go. And there's been so many times I can point to in my own career where I can look to mentees and they have their set expectations the first time they met, because I'll ask them, and then a year or two goes by and they will have surpassed those expectations. And again, they are happy, I'm happy, and importantly, we are helping to support the advancement of science, which eventually is meant to improve the health of people around the world. This is this figure is in the special issue of the Journal on Mentoring in Low and Middle Income Countries. I just wanted to share this for a moment, just to kind of differentiate. I'm sure you've had lots of discussions around what is mentoring and how is it different than maybe some earlier concepts you came into, and how is it similar? So if we look at the this figure that Shaili Prasad from the University of Minnesota created, you see this sense of there's elements of mentoring in coaching. There's also elements in moving then from the trabajo, the job, to the career. And then there's the mission focus. But ultimately, the goal of mentoring should be to help mentees, help trainees to move into the, in quotes, the calling, right? Where you have this passion and you're successful at the same time, and really fulfilling your own personal mission. Again, ideally with advancing your science and the science of the team that you're working with or leading in order to bring about improved health for people around the world. So these are other ways to kind of continue or think about transitioning the mentoring relationship as a person moves from junior faculty to mid-career. I mentioned the example of the individual I spoke with yesterday. So talking about funding opportunities, grant writing advice, research paper review and feedback, institutional committee membership, and then outside commitments. To finding those balances. The other thing that happens oftentimes, somewhere in here oftentimes from postdoc to junior faculty to mid-career, is not only is the person's career advancing, but oftentimes their personal life is advancing, whether they are having a family or not, but there are also these other family balancing the work-life balance. These are issues that I think oftentimes people at this stage, kind of this early to mid-career, need support and advocacy sometimes with senior people within the institution to be able to navigate that, because things come up, whether it be children or whether it be older family members, parents who need support, or just personal time in order to be able to have a fulfilling life, not just focused on work, but one that actually finds and navigates that balance. So how long does the mentoring relationship go on for? It can go on for the rest of your life. As I mentioned, the relationship I have with King Holmes as an example is someone that continues, although unfortunately because of COVID, I haven't been able to see him during this past year. And there's other people back in my training that I also look to and communicate with, maybe just a few times a year, but those are very valuable times. And I certainly enjoy it when the mentees that have left UCSF communicate with me. We have a Zoom call now, and I feel like I'm almost visiting with them around the country or in different parts of the world. It is important, again, going back to the conflict resolution, to think about how to resolve these conflicts. Usually this can be resolved between the two individuals, but sometimes outside help is needed, whether it be from a neutral person to help to navigate that. And we don't have time right now to discuss it, but I'm sure some of you at least can point to instances where you've had these conflicts and probably could have used some help in order to navigate those challenges that you've had. So I'm finished the talk, and thank you so much for your time. Here's my email. If any of you have any questions, I know you can put them in the Q&A or the chat. I think someone's coordinating that if we have some time for questions. Otherwise, you feel free to email me. I'll usually respond within a few days if you have any questions around mentoring. And then I'd also highlight if you're interested in more from the academic perspective around mentoring, I would encourage you to look at the special issue in the American Journal of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene, and that was published in January of 2019. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Craig. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for flagging up that paper, and the reference to that paper was put in your initial mailing in the program that we sent out to you before the course started. So you have that reference for that paper there as well. That's really useful. There are a lot of questions. So I think one of the questions that comes up is, I think, or in various ways, is that there seems to be it takes a lot of time, or there's a lot of time to mentor well. You're putting a lot into mentoring. And so the questions, there are two sort of associated questions. One is, how many mentees on that kind of in-depth one-to-one mentoring program would a mentor have? And also there's a question about, thinking about Peru, where you have, and I'm sure it's the same in the States as well, where there are universities who are for-profit private universities and public universities. How do you make the business case?
Okay, I can answer the first one more easily than the second one. The first one, I would say, it really is up to you to determine how much time you want to devote to mentoring. It does take a lot of time. I have a passion for mentoring. I'm also, and everyone's supported in their job differently. I'm 90% grant funded, so meaning I get to do what I want 90% of my week. The 10% is working at the clinic. So I get to determine how I want to do that. With the people that are where I'm really developing my mentoring relationship, I'm meeting with people on a weekly basis. It used to be in person and Zoom. Now it's all Zoom for obvious reasons. And I have mentees in Kenya. I usually go to Kenya 4 times a year, but not this past year, of course. And then I have my mentees at Ucsf. So I'm meeting with them usually for an hour. It can be shorter. I want them to come in. There are time-saving steps if that's important. I have them develop an agenda before the meeting and send it to me before the meeting. If they want me to review a paper or an abstract or a grant or specific aims page, I have them send that to me ahead of time. And then we go over it in detail while we're doing the mentoring meeting. So it's confined to a certain time. I don't just have them, I mean, sometimes they just come and find me, although not this past year. But usually we have a scheduled time. I have them schedule the time. Their next meeting, they schedule at the meeting that we're just finishing. So we have that set. The other a time-saving way, and then there's also, I should say, every relationship is not equal, right? Some of your mentees, you're going to devote a lot of time over a number of years. This could be like a postdoc or a graduate, like a PhD student. I do have students that I mentor shorter periods of time, maybe for a year, medical students at UCSF, between their first and second year, get a summer period to do research. I work with them for 6 months before and usually for at least 6 months after. And these students, most of them have traveled to Kenya to do research. So if I have 2 or 3 going to Kenya at the same time, now I start meeting with them, not all the time, but oftentimes I'll meet with them together as a group, right? Because I'm sharing information, a lot of it, especially for the, these are people who are very junior in research. So they'll oftentimes have the same questions and maybe be working on a project together, but from different angles. So I'll meet with them together. I also will encourage them to support each other, so review each other's specific aims, tools, and instruments that they plan on implementing in the field. And then when they're in Kenya together, they also are supporting one another too. So that way it provides, they're supporting each other. Peer mentorship is a very important concept as well. The other thing I've done too, because I'm more senior than most of the people that I'm supporting, I also bring in junior faculty or sometimes even postdocs to serve as a co-mentor for the students. So I might meet with them once or twice a month, but the postdoc might be meeting with them on a weekly or even several times a week basis. So it's kind of it's not quite the same, but it's kind of an extension of you as you become more senior in your careers to be able to extend your reach. And oftentimes I can think of, and I'm sure Patty could say the same, I can think of my meetings with King, and it's 1 hour. I mean, even when I was a fellow, I'd meet with him 4 times a year for 1 hour each because I was living in Kenya and he was in Seattle. And those 1 hour meetings were so critical for me to gain a foothold and determine where I was going to go for the next 6 months. So it depends on your relationship. Sometimes you need to really dig into the weeds and look at instruments and tools or help them with a lab experiment, develop their proposal. Other times it's really this bigger picture piece. As far as the public-private, I'm probably not the best person to answer that, but certainly you have responsibilities in your job and you need to fulfill those. I think anytime there's an opportunity though to bring in a trainee to help you with a certain work, if you're a lecturer helping design to either maybe serve as a teaching assistant, or if you work in a lab, or if you're working in a clinic, you can have somebody accompany you in the clinic if that's possible. Those are opportunities now for teaching, and some of those relationships may turn into a mentor-mentee relationship.
Okay, yeah, there are some lots of questions, and I'm just going to ask one because this has come up. If you're okay to answer, this has come up in several sessions that we've done. How do you get rid of mentees that aren't worthy of your expertise? Mentees that aren't pulling their weight, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. So usually it happens naturally. I mean, of course, all mentees are not created equal, although the majority of them surpass usually my own expectations or that I have initially. But I think what I'll do, let's say I have a student I'm working with and they're working on a manuscript, they've collected the data, they're working on a manuscript. This is something that's pretty common. And you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting. I think what I do usually is I'll sit down with them and say, look, you know, 6 months ago, you said you were going to have a draft of this manuscript. This is really important work. You've invested a lot. We'll have a talk about it. Of course, there may be extenuating circumstances, a loss in the family and so forth, and we need to discuss those issues. Oftentimes there are those sorts of issues. But then I'll sit down, okay, when do you think you can get a first draft of the manuscript to me with all your other responsibilities? Okay, 3 months. Okay, 3 months. We're going to set the deadline December 1st. If you don't meet that deadline, that expectation, we're in agreement. I'm not pressuring you, right? We have that expectation. Then the plan will be to hand this over to another student and you will not be first author anymore. Is that okay with you? Yes, that's okay with me. It's extremely infrequent that I've had to go and pull the trigger on that last part. Sometimes the timeline gets extended for a variety of reasons, but usually that sort of negotiation will work. But for that sort of individual, I may not, if they go on to do a postdoc, I may not choose to want to continue to be their mentor because I know that we may not quite support one another in the way that would be advantageous for them, and also creates extra burden on me as well. So every situation is different, but I think having clear expectations and being in agreement with those expectations is probably a good strategy.
Yes, I think being clear when things aren't working.
And in writing, ideally in an email in writing, we've agreed on December 1st. Yes, yes. So it's because memories can, change.
I'm sure we could go on and on and on because talking to someone who's had that depth of experience of different types of mentoring is really useful. So thank you for that. But it's tied in brilliantly with the things that we've also been discussing over the last 3 days. And you'll probably be pleased to hear that we're going to be looking at diversity and difference in depth tomorrow.
Excellent.
And I think that's an important point to raise as well. So thank you so much. And thank you for making your email available. I'm sure you'll get questions as well.
Great. Well, thanks everyone. And I wish you a good rest of your course and a good rest of the week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Greg.
Thanks, Maddie. Bye.
So I'm just quickly going to share my screen. I was going to talk a little bit about tools and resources, but I will send you a couple of things after this course. I realize we're towards the end of our time and we're all busy people. So we will email you some things after this, and there will also be the follow-up handbook. So we will put more resources and connections and information within that handbook as well. So as always, there is the link. So we would still be really grateful if you could complete the very short feedback link again. And I think it's been in the chat several times. And if you can do that as you've done every day, that's fantastic. Please rest assured that we look at them, and all these comments will be used as we go forward. Where I've got a few more minutes, I think there are a lot of questions coming through about structures structures of mentoring in Peru, and the question that we said about the difference between the private and the public universities, whether the mentoring schemes should be part of institutional policy, whether they should be formal or informal, who will run the schemes, who's responsible, who will be chosen to be mentees. And really these and similar questions are going to have to be answered by CONCITEC and the Committee por Mujeres going forward, and I'm sure that will form part of the follow-up from this. So these sessions really are about to give some background and some depth about mentoring and processes and different examples. And tomorrow we'll be looking at diversity and difference, and we'll have two different types of people joining us, looking at in depth at different types of examples of mentoring as well. So I think that's probably all for today. And thank you so much for all of your attention and joining in and taking part in the group sessions as well. And if you can complete this short feedback form before you go so that we can compile that evidence, that'd be fantastic. Thank you to everyone. Muchas gracias.